Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Rotsinger, and I am the pre-sessional director at the University of St. Andrews, and I'm joined by my colleague, Professor Owen Jordan. Owen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi, nice to meet you. Owen Jordan, also from University of St. Andrews.
And we're going to give you a short presentation today about a website that we've created, which we called Encounters with New Cultures, a new web resource offering cultural encounter exercises to develop intercultural competence. Owen will begin by describing the kind of motivation behind our creating this website and the things that led up to it, and then I will take over and explain how the website works and the positive impact that we feel that it could have. So over to you, Owen.
Great, thanks, Aaron. And so, yeah, just to follow on from that overview, so I'll be talking really about background to the web resource, and then a little bit about what encounter exercises actually are. And then I'll hand over to Aaron for introducing the website and then using that to have some positive impact in whatever context you're teaching or working in. So moving on to the background. So some of the thoughts around this really started with experiences that I've had here at St Andrews, also at a previous institution, Xi'anjiaotong Liverpool University in China, where in being involved with English for academic purposes provision, we get feedback sometimes from academics in other schools, other parts of the universities about students being reported as struggling with English language skills. I think that was often a kind of term that was referred to when people were talking about students struggling. And from the descriptions of some of those problems, I started to wonder, in some cases at least, whether, is this always an English language problem? Is it about language and linguistic knowledge? Or are some of these things intercultural communication problems? And just to illustrate that, I remember one particular example where a lecturer who was, I think, from North America had said, he feels that his students really struggle with English because when he puts a question out to them, no one puts up their hand to answer. And after talking about it a bit more, this was a situation where there were 50 or more Chinese students in a lecture theatre. And, from my view, there's a lot of reasons why a student might not volunteer an answer in that context, which has nothing really to do with their language skills, but more perhaps to do with whether they're used to being asked questions and just volunteering answers in those kind of contexts, and also things like nervousness in front of peers as well. So those sort of examples made me think, some of the problems that are labeled as English language problems, are they actually intercultural communication problems rather than being about linguistic ability and knowledge? And so following on from that, what can we do to actually enhance the intercultural communication skills of, I've put here all students, and I wanted to emphasize all to mean not just international students, but also domestic students in any context. But I should probably also include here staff as well, because I think intercultural communication is something that we can more obviously work on with all participants in communication events, rather than having English language provision being focused specifically on perhaps one group of international students predominantly. So moving on from that, so some of that thinking started when I was in China at Xi'anjiaotong Liverpool University. That was also where I first encountered Professor Don Snow, who at the time worked elsewhere, but currently works at Duke Kunshan University in China. And some of his work that he has done on critical incident exercises. Describe a little bit what these are in a minute, but broadly the thinking that after experiencing one of his workshops was, is there something we could do with critical incident exercises that could be used to enhance students' intercultural competence? And that would not only be the students who have been, let's say, labeled as needing extra support with their English language skills, but all students and potentially staff as well. Now, to just unpack that a bit, firstly, what do I mean by intercultural competence? There are quite a lot of definitions of this term floating around, but I just picked out from an encyclopedia entry here a very brief, summarized sort of description of this, just to give a sort of general idea about what we're talking about. So, in a communication situation, effective and appropriate engagement with cultural differences, I think it's what we're talking about here. And in terms of critical incident exercises to be used to develop that competence, um, really what we're talking about here are sort of opportunities for structured reflection on some kind of misunderstanding or problem or puzzle that's occurred in an intercultural communication setting. That is, where people from different cultural backgrounds are communicating and there's been some kind of misunderstanding or problem. We'll look at how that's typically structured in a minute. But to talk about Don Snow's work, which I've sampled, which I've cited here, he divides these exercises into two types, cultural assimilators and encounter exercises. The cultural assimilators, based on his definition, are ones where there's some sort of problem or scenario, and then there's a question, and typically there's a kind of multiple choice answer, maybe 4 different selections available to answer. And although there are no correct and incorrect answers, there's certainly one of those responses that is much more likely than the other. And really, the focus of those kind of exercises is about learning about specific cultural contexts. So you might learn about typically maybe how people communicate in, let's say, Japan, or maybe in a Southeast Asian country, for example. The second type there is encounter exercises, which I'm going to go on to talk about now. And these are much more open-ended. So there'll still be the sort of scenario, but there are questions then that prompt reflection, but no multiple choice answers. And so the aim here is really to exercise and practice the ability to step back and reflect on a situation and consider different possibilities. So to break that down, and I should say as well, encounter exercises, I'm zoning in on this here because that is the focus of our website. So these typically consist of a story, quite a short story often, where participants are coming from different cultural backgrounds, and then somehow or another there's a misunderstanding or a problem, or sometimes just something that's a bit puzzling that happens in the story. And then following on from that, in these encounter exercises, we have questions that try and help students or users of the activity, participants in the activity, to understand why the problem or the misunderstanding or the puzzle has happened. So often those questions may be simply, why did person X behave in the way they did, or something similar to that. And importantly, there are no correct answers. There are often no, although our website provides some suggestions, there are no sample answers sometimes for some of these. And really the muscle that's being exercised here is trying to promote slow, or sometimes called system 2 thinking. This is cited from Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. So to step back from kind of instinct and instinctive reactions to things and think through what are different possible explanations for things, and then logically kind of try and weigh those up into maybe more likely and less likely. And you'll see some examples of that when we look at the website a bit later on. And so the benefits of using these exercises, in my view at least, are that this kind of preparation, going through the story of a scenario that maybe a student might encounter in the future, it can help them deal with unfamiliar situations. Even if it's not the one that's been described, it's given them, a student, the practice of considering something unfamiliar, stepping back from it, reflecting and thinking about how to respond in a reasoned way. It can also highlight possible challenges that they may face if we sort of tailor stories to be ones that are they more likely to encounter. For example, if a student's going to study abroad in a certain country, we could probably pick out stories that relevant to a student studying abroad as an international student in that particular context. And the other handy thing about these encounter exercises is that if you work in language teaching, for example, as I do and have, these are activities that integrate very well into language classes, can promote a lot of discussion while at the same time training this intercultural communication skill. They're also, I think, very useful, and I've seen them used for orientation sessions before, for example, students go to study abroad somewhere too. So moving on to the next slide. So overall, I'd come to the idea that encounter exercises in particular, as one type of critical incident exercise, that could be a really useful tool. It'd be great to get students using them more and more. However, an issue that I had noted was that there's not really many of them that you can access readily online that are sort of seem appropriate for use in the classroom. So although there's a book that Don Snow has produced, I think it's Encounters with Westerners. It's very much targeted at a Chinese audience. It's not readily available online. There are also not many other sort of ready to use sort of examples or a database of these that you can search. And that's where, in discussion with Aaron, we were talking about, could we develop a web resource that builds up a kind of data bank of these exercises that would be of use for ourselves as educators, but also to other educators and possibly other people in workplace situations as well. So that's really the chronology and background as to where we got to and the idea for having a web resource came from. And with that, I'm going to hand over now to Aaron to talk you through the resource itself.
Thank you very much, Owen. So I'm just going to do this by actually showing you the website here. So here's the website, here's the front page of the website, and at the top we've got a bar which has most of the different options that people will use when they come to this website. And first is the cultural encounter exercises themselves. So if we just click here, you can see right now there are only 6, but we do envision this growing quite a bit. So down here is just a list of all the different cultural encounter exercises or critical incident exercises that are available on the website at the moment. Next, we have some instructions on how we recommend that people use the exercises in classrooms or in away days or workplace situations, just explaining kind of how we think that it works best. And then here we have an interview with Professor Don Snow that we did while he was visiting us in Scotland last year. And it's just an interview that Owen and I, we sat down with Don Snow for about half an hour and sort of talked about his experiences and how this idea came about. So if we go back to the cultural encounter exercises, and I'll show you one and how it works in a bit more detail. So here we have the title and then some information about the author and editor, which in this case happens to be me, but it usually isn't. And then the situation. So this describes a situation that happens. This is something that could be realistic. It could be something that has been inspired by something that the author had actually experienced or had heard about, or it can be just a situation that was invented in order to highlight a certain kind of possible conflict. And here it's about a student from China in Scotland, and they're walking around when somebody asks them for directions. And the person speaks very fast, and the Chinese student kind of looks away, and the local person gets a bit upset and annoyed and then kind of storms off. And then following that, there's a question that we ask the students, which is what went wrong? So in a small group, discuss the situation and try to figure out why the people acted the way they did. And think of several reasons, some that might be positive, some that might be negative, but just highlighting the fact that there's no wrong answer. They're just making predictions about why this happened in the first place. If students don't come up with a lot of answers themselves, we have here some suggested possibilities that the teacher can throw out as well, just to keep the discussion going. And then after sort of students have volunteered the different reasons why they think this might have happened and talked about them a little bit, we have some follow-up questions if you'd like to take the discussion a bit deeper as well. And these are just sort of to help the teacher keep the discussion along. They're not necessary to be part of the cultural encounter exercise at all. They're just recommended. So also the final one here at the top is how you contribute. So we're asking people to, if they want to be able to write me directly with some of this information about how they'd like to see their cultural encounter exercise look, and I'll then edit it and publish it on the website. Now, if we go to one that was submitted by someone externally, for example, here at the top, you can see that the author of this was one of our DProf students, and he sent me some of his cultural encounter exercise that he uses in class, and I kind of formatted them in the way that we want to have them on the website, and we've given him credit. And additionally, if we go back to the first page, the home page, you can see at the bottom that this is all come through a Creative Commons license. And there's a link here which explains basically that you're allowed to share it in any format that you want. You're allowed to adapt it in any way that you want. The only restrictions are that you have to give us, including the author, credit, and also that you can't make money off of it. It's a non-commercial license. The last thing I'd like to show you here is that eventually when we, this website sort of hopefully has a lot more resources on it. We've been putting tags on so you can quite easily find things by topic and also category in order to help the user kind of find cultural encounter exercises that are more appropriate for their context. And that's that. I'm now going to flip back to the PowerPoint here. Yep, there we go. Just give me a second here to flip down to the slide. And we'll talk about the positive impact that we think that this website can have. So as we wait, there we go. Right, so I see this being used mostly probably in a classroom, and you could use it with students who are preparing to go abroad as an exercise to get them sort of thinking about the kind of sort of mindset that they might want to adopt when they're abroad and kind of being more flexible and open to different kinds of encounters. It can, of course, be used while they're abroad, or it could just be a critical thinking activity to build intercultural competence anyway. It doesn't necessarily require them to have spent any time abroad or have any plans to do so. As Matthews says, and I cite here, becoming interculturally competent demands reflexive thought. And that's what we're trying to do with this, is get students to put themselves in a position where they're kind of in a way role-playing, being in one of these encounters, and they have to confront this context that they don't really completely understand and figure out a more effective course of action than the one that perhaps happened in the story that we're telling them. So in this situation, what could have been done in order to not have this conflict occur or to make things a bit smoother. So I imagine the most common use of this will be a classroom, but I think also these work really well in the workplace, especially in workplaces that have sort of diverse employees. And I think using these in kind of away days or just team building exercises of any kind can really help people, and even if they're not sort of diverse, just to understand each other. And before you jump to the conclusion that, hey, I didn't get the response that I expected, therefore it must be negative, to sort of thinking, okay, I didn't get the response that I expected. Why didn't I get this? What could have been some of the motivations? What have I done that caused that response? Or what kind of experiences does this other person have that would cause them to react that way? And how should I process that rather than immediately becoming sort of upset or offended or angry or something like that? And so we think that these will be able to create a positive impact for classrooms and for the workplace, but also we think that the positive impact extends not only to the people on the other end of this cultural encounter exercise, but also the teachers and trainers themselves. Because, for example, they can adapt these exercises to their own local context, which has benefits, of course, in sort of getting them to think about their own context, getting the students to think about their context, but also for them to kind of to think about where they're coming from and maybe adapt these in a way that works for them a little bit more. We also encourage people to submit these exercises from their own experiences, and that will allow them to share those experiences with other people. And of course, because we're allowing them to retain authorship for these, and we're clearly showing it as well as a link to their information, their profile or their email or something like that. This can easily be listed on a CV, on LinkedIn, or any other kind of profile that they'd like to link it to. So this is also an opportunity for professional development and for showing off kind of their own output. So that's the website that we've created. And great. All right, everybody, thank you very much for attending our talk.